The rock stars have arrived. The power of photographs and the importance of photojournalism. The photographers here are the original storytellers. And David Walmsley, I'm David Walmsley, the editor-in-chief of the Globe and Mail, and it's an absolute honor to welcome this illustrious panel. Lynsey Addario, to my immediate right, Hannah McKay, Reuters, and Marcus Yam of the Globe and Mail. Welcome. The images you'll see in this session will be upsetting. That's the whole point. We are here because we care, and we don't shy away from the reality of the world. And as Lynsey said to me off stage, if you're not upset by some of this, then you are AI. The sentient human being has more power than they realize, I think, in this current climate. My first question, Lynsey, is to you, because you've traveled so often. Harry Evans loved you. And you would meet often with him and commune, but you had to choose the stories to go to. And most recently, for the Atlantic magazine, under new ownership, very strong publication, you've been to Sudan and Chad. Let's take a look at some of the photos. Tell us about this child.
So just to back up a little bit, I started covering Sudan over 20 years ago when I was covering the war in Darfur. And I went there for 6 straight years, and I thought it was in my rearview mirror. And of course, a few years ago, I started talking to the Atlantic, and last year they asked me to go to Sudan with Anne Applebaum, who was here earlier. And this little girl, she was wounded in a mortar strike. And the irony was that a month earlier, I had been in Khartoum and in Omdurman, which is sort of a suburb of Khartoum. And it was about 10 o'clock at night, and a mortar landed about a block from where we were staying. And immediately I asked the intelligence guy, who was our minder, to take me to the hospital. And he did, surprisingly, because they usually say no to everything we ask. And he took me, and when I got there, there were children and women sort of splayed out amidst blood all over the floor of the hospital. There were, I think, 36 injured. And then I went back. I went into Chad, and we ended up getting access through the rebels. And the rebels took us to show us their civilian casualties. And this little girl was wounded around the same time, also in a mortar attack in the same area. And I just asked myself, was she on the other side? And was she the one who was maybe brought to a different place, or maybe not even a hospital? And I ended up meeting her in Darfur.
And how has the situation changed? You say you've been going back and forth to Sudan over 20 years. Has access improved? Has the challenge become more difficult? There's 14 million people displaced.
I think what we've learned, I've been covering war over 25 years, and I think what I've learned is that governments have learned not to let us in. I think there are so many conflicts now that we can't cover. We can't get into Gaza. It's almost impossible to get into Sudan. I've been trying, actually, for 6 months to get into Sudan, and I've been rejected. We can't get, there are so many places we just can't access. Iran is another place. Only a handful of journalists are allowed into these places. And that's a real tragedy, because we all suffer when we can't see the truth.
Hannah, you began with the Thompson family through Reuters news agency 9 years ago. And one of the most remarkable first assignments you had was to the far-off land of Myanmar. Let's have a look. Now, it's safe to say, Hannah, you'd never been to Myanmar before. Explain a little bit about your career up to that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd been at Reuters about 6 weeks by the time I was sent on this assignment. It was a first of many. I'd only ever been on holiday to Spain, so this was the... But it really opened my eyes to the importance of journalism, and actually when you leave the UK you realise how valued cameras are. I think here in the UK it's a lot of no access. So this assignment was incredible for the openness to taking pictures of people, and it was towards the end of Reuters coverage, so I think by this point most of the refugees had set up base in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. And I was mostly there just to cover daily life, but then you saw them crossing the river. That was like the last big crossing from Myanmar, and so it kind of turned into a completely different situation to what I'd expected or anybody else expected. And this lady collapsed with exhaustion. You know, they'd been walking for days, crossed a river, no belongings, nowhere to go. So yeah, it was really opened up my eyes.
So you began the assignment in Cox's Bazar, which was really hosting the destitute from Myanmar in Bangladesh, but you then moved into Myanmar.
We just went to the border. We couldn't get into Myanmar. It's
Right.
very difficult. So this was at the border where they'd crossed in. Again, they had no idea where they were going, and I mean, I didn't either.
And tell us a little bit about the woman in the ditch.
She was part of the previous picture was how it looked for days of a constant flow of people just walking through. And she collapsed with exhaustion. And a few people, you know, at first they were just on their own journey and walked past her. And then eventually people stopped and helped. And I don't know what happened to her, but I hope she at least made it to safety in the camp.
The Good Samaritan. You also mentioned that the joy not only of freedom of movement and the ability to cover the story, but also the colors.
Yeah. It's just, I can't even describe it now, even 9 years on, the amount of colour that I saw. You know, London's pretty grey at the best of times, so the clothing, the culture, the land, everything. It was an incredible first assignment.
Hell of a baptism, that's for sure. And Marcus, you have covered a lot of ground over the years in your career. You spent 12 years in Los Angeles with the LA Times. Of course, the big story that came there most recently was the profound fires that ravaged LA, particularly the Thomas Fire, which is a gigantic fire. Let's take a look at some of the images of Marcus and the fires of LA. I mean, it looks like a movie set, doesn't it? The whole idea of color, as Hannah said, in the contrasts of fire, it's made to be photographed. But tell us a little bit of the challenges that you face as a photographer when you're in the middle of an inferno.
Fires often, I mean, I would say that first, I will backtrack a little bit about this picture. One of the biggest challenges about fire is figuring out where it's going. So this fire, the Thomas Fire, actually started in Santa Paula, and I was coming off of a long work day, and it kicked off, and an evacuation order was issued, and I was driving towards it, but then I realized it was moving fast west. So I drove ahead, and we just guessed that it would end up in Ventura. So I just decided I'm going to go to Ventura and get ahead of this fire. And when I did, the fire was just starting to arrive, and I thought to myself, I went past all the people evacuating, all the cars lining up to drive out. I thought to myself, here's a news picture, but then maybe I should keep going. So I kept going, driving into the darkness, just to see, in my head, map out. I've never been to Ventura, so I thought to myself, I'm going to go explore Ventura. What a fun time to go. And somewhere in the darkness, I was kind of in my head mapping out the roads, and I came across a car, this car that was like turned on, with nobody in it. So I thought to myself, did something happen? Is this person okay? So I actually stopped to check. And I couldn't see anybody, but maybe a couple of minutes went by, and this woman just like quietly walks out of this house, puts a box in the car, and just drove off. And before I could even like stop her to say hi to her and everything. And actually, funny enough, a little backstory, I actually got an email from a reader, because I had been self-publishing, it was like middle of the night, our newsroom, the newsroom of the Los Angeles Times wasn't updating as fast as possible. So I was self-publishing on Twitter, and a reader actually wrote back and said that was his mother, and he's glad to see her actually change her mind and leave, basically.
Lynsey, conflict is never far from you. You've covered a lot of war, but Ukraine obviously has a special hold, I think, on everyone. And it's a place that you intimately documented for the New York Times. You've won and been a finalist for Pulitzers on that story. But let's go back to March the 6th, 2022, when you took what has become an iconic image of war. And in that moment, when you took this picture, you thought the New York Times wouldn't publish the photos because they showed a dead family. Tell us about that process. Both your idea of what to shoot, how you framed it, and how you had to fight with the desk, or how the desk accepted it.
Marcus and I were actually in Ukraine around the same time, or at the same time.
At the same time.
At the same time, and also working around Irpin. That's where this photo was taken. And basically, there was an exodus of people coming out of Irpin, the suburbs around Kiev. And for a photographer, it's hard to get information very quickly. We often have to just go to see what's happening. And so I went very early on a Sunday morning, and it was eerily quiet. There were people crossing this broken bridge, trying to get out of the suburbs and come to Kiev. And immediately you can hear a lot of shelling in the distance and artillery fire. And so we took cover behind this wall. And shortly after arriving, I was photographing people streaming, and I remember looking through my viewfinder and cursing because I was watching these little kids and parents struggling to sort of drag their kids to safety under fire. And suddenly a round came in, and it landed sort of a few hundred meters off in the distance. So my security advisor said, "Do you want to leave?" And I said, no, they're not going to hit this evacuation route. It's all women and children. They know that, they can't hit that. And then within like a few minutes, another round came in closer, and that's called bracketing for anyone who doesn't know the military terms, when you kind of zero in on a position. And so within seconds, I dove for cover and I popped up, and another round landed so close, it was like 30 feet away, that my entire neck was sprayed with what I thought was shrapnel, but it was gravel, thankfully. And by the time I popped up, everything was very dusty. I didn't know if I had been hit. I was bleeding. And our security advisor ran across the street, and when he called us over, we had come upon a family. And my instinct was to leave. We were still under fire. I was in shock. I knew that we had just narrowly survived. And I started shooting, and I had come upon this family feet first. And so I registered that there was a child. I saw the moon boots, and I worked my way around, and then we ran. We ran, and there were 2 more rounds that came in very close as we were leaving. And when I got back to the car, I messaged the New York Times, and I said, I was just in this attack, and I didn't really know if I had made a photograph that was in focus or that would convey the drama. And sometimes, as anyone who's covered conflict, sometimes you convince yourself that actually it wasn't very dangerous, like maybe it was far away. And so I sent the photos, and then I started pleading with one of the foreign editors, like, please, can you look at these, and can you please go to bat for me and publish these? Because we were in the attack. It was not just a random attack. It was actually targeting civilians intentionally. And so, as a photographer, we don't have much power or sway. We just send the photos, and we hope that the editors will go with what we lobby for. And in the end, it ended up on the front page of the New York Times, and it was used in Congress to lobby for more funding for Ukraine to fight against the Russians, because it was exactly when Putin was saying he did not target civilians.
Thank you for that. And from that lost family to your own family. Your latest documentary is called Love and War, and it looks at the impact of your work on you and your sisters, on your kids, and on Paul, your husband. Let's watch a clip.
1 month in Ukraine, then maybe back 2 weeks, then maybe speaking engagement or an exhibition, and then back a little bit.
Your name's Mommy.
Yeah, my name is Mommy.
Then Ukraine, and then something else.
One of us has to be a constant in the kids' lives. Paul left Reuters. He started doing consulting. That enabled us to have a family.
Nice? You like it?
I've set it up so that if something does happen to me, they have Paul.
They have Paul. It's incredibly emotional. I've seen the whole doc. Given the cost that you might not come home, what keeps driving you?
I mean, it's the question that's going to be on my tombstone because I get asked that question. And I don't really, I would say I've seen the impact of good journalism. I've seen the impact of good photography. I've seen people, sort of the light bulb go on. I've seen people change their minds because of good journalism. I hope to affect policy. I've been able to impact people with maternal death work. Merck for Mothers was started in part because of a photo essay I did where they put $500 million aside to fight maternal death based on a photo essay in part. And so I think if I can do anything to move the dial a little bit in this world, I will. And I can't not do it.
Thank you. Marcus, Afghanistan. It's a conflict that you've returned to again and again, 3 separate trips in less than 5 years. Let's take a look at some of the images that you took when documenting specifically the US withdrawal and the Taliban return to power in 2021. These images won you a Pulitzer. To get a sense of timing, you were flying into Kabul, and isn't that the common theme of everyone? As everyone else is leaving, the photographers are heading in. And you went into Kabul while the US troops were flying people and themselves out, and the world's media headlights were fully on Afghanistan. How did you ensure that your work stood out and was more than competitive?
Very good question. It's hard to, as a news photographer, you always look for these singular image of the day, what drives, what is the image that speaks to the day, and I was obviously started out by doing that first. I had gone in a day before the country fell. I literally took probably one of the last commercial flights in before the airport closed down. And I realized I wasn't getting reinforcements anytime soon. People were stuck outside. And I had to figure out how else to cover it because I was in some ways, no pun intended, outgunned. And there were so many other, and I wasn't able to get to a lot of places just because my driver had just abandoned us to save his family. I told him to go do that. And I was taking the yellow cab around, and I had to pick and choose, basically. I couldn't be there for some of the defining moments when the country fell. And my then editor, who's now retired, and I sat down after a very frustrating first day where I missed all the pictures, but I did a lot of reporting on what was going on. And we were looking at what everybody was doing that first 24 hours. We were looking at CNN, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times. And like a good sports coach, he asked me, what do you see? What patterns do you see? And it's on this, he was trained a chemical engineer, and I was trained an aerospace engineer. So I understood systems. So I said, everybody's obsessed with the Taliban. And he was like, correct. And we said, what do you not see? Nobody is talking about the losers. So we created a model for ourselves. Moving forward, that day onwards, day 2, end of day 1, we would only look at all these stories that we would do from the eyes of the loser and take that perspective moving forward instead of being obsessed with the Taliban. We did a few Taliban stories here and there, but I never tried to give them a platform or tried to, emphasize that as much.
So in identifying the through line as the losers, the LA Times worked with you to publish the work with a bunch of text overlaid as well. How did the assignment change and the storytelling of the story change in the weeks that you were there?
A lot of what was going on was rapidly changing. when we were on the ground, there was no clarity. In the early days, I mean, everybody was evacuating. Nobody knew what they would do to Westerners or let alone journalists. I mean, I fought very hard to stay in country. I actually defied evacuation orders because as a student of history, this echoes of the Vietnam War. And I was very adamant to stay behind because the lasting image of the Vietnam War is the American helicopter pulling people off rooftops. But you don't remember the images after that. And I was, determined to just stay, And so my then editor also fought for me to stay, and we realized the only way to do it is a accumulation of observations, which is where the idea of like diaries came along. So he asked me like every day, write your thoughts down, what you saw, what you did, and I did it in a form of an email to them sometimes, here's my little diary for the day, like what I did, and we just turned that into a long piece basically and published it.
And was this also in an attempt to compete against the theft of attention with readers who simply see so much visual work and they move on from one thing to the next? Do you find that technique provides some stickability for the work that you do?
I don't know if it's like a clear intention on my part to like get attention and get readers to stay on it, but it was more to just like grasp at something tangible. I mean, I wanted to collect observations. We have a proximity with our work, that proximity and responsibilities are the two tenets that we have, and we have to try to make sure we document everything, even if we're unsure of it. We have to try to, in some ways, put it in a picture and put it in words. And I think that what I was doing, I was also, again, self-publishing, thanks to, in the heyday of Twitter, before pre-Elon Musk Twitter. And I was able to just push out dispatches, as we went, basically, as fast as possible, because I would have a system where I would file quickly, but I also push it out immediately.
I have a question. Am
Please.
I allowed?
Of course. This is the management-defying group.
I never follow the rules. The LA Times didn't have a problem with you putting things on Twitter before they were published, or before, because we could never do that for most of the publications I work for, ever. I mean, nothing can see the light of day until like 10 days after they've selected what they want.
No, actually, because the LA Times is also legacy media, they were trying to figure out this new frontier, and I was one of the first few photographers to go in and change the way they do live coverage. I mean, when I joined them in 2014, I was like live tweeting a protest already, and was like sending send photos, tweet, and send it directly to the desk also. Yeah. And they had no problems with it because for them, it was more about, it's almost like the idea of throwing a pizza at the ceiling and seeing what sticks.
Yeah.
And they were willing, to their credit, willing to let that experiment go through.
If the desk is asleep, you've got the perfect alibi, haven't you?
Exactly. I mean, half the things happen.
I would have phoned you, but I wanted you to have your beauty sleep. Yeah?
Well, the Californian time zone is so far away that, when things happen, they're oftentimes asleep. So I have to wait for them to wake up and work into the wee hours of the night wherever I was. But it was very rewarding getting to self-publish and getting to just push out dispatches. I wasn't trying to put an analysis in anything. I was just saying, here's what I saw. And the same in Ukraine also.
Lucky.
Okay, we're going to move away from war and misery for a moment. Hannah, you had a number of images that were bringing out some chuckles with the crowd in the video roll. You've covered a lot of big events, popes, prime ministers, and princes, and a number of them have become viral snapshots of big ceremonial moments. Let's take a look at the picture of the royals on the balcony, and some of the challenges that you face when you're shooting such an orchestrated, essentially a photo op.
Yeah, I mean, these kind of assignments aren't my favorite to cover. And if there's any member of the royal family in the room, that's not personal to you. It's just they're so restrictive, and you're kind of penned in, and you're almost told what to photograph, so it's difficult to find something different than what, often there can be 30 photographers standing right next to you all doing the same, so it's completely different to, say, the previous set of pictures, but, being a wire photographer for Reuters in London, it is part of the job. So this is on, I think it was the Troop in the Colour, which, happened every year for the Queen's birthday, and it's a big ceremonial event, and you're very, very far away in a long lens.
So where are you when you're taking this?
So this was
picture?
taken on the Queen Victoria Memorial, which is sort of the roundabout opposite Buckingham Palace, and they watch a fly past. I could see something was going on in my lens with Louis, but it was only when I looked back I realised what he was doing. And
so you couldn't capture it in real time because they were such small specks?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our job is hit and hope, so I was sort of just...
The secret side.
I was hitting and hoping with this. And a lot of people didn't get the picture because the setup was people had tripods and were swapping between cameras, but I just made sure that I stuck on a really long lens on the balcony, because when kids are involved, Harry did the same when he was a kid, so I think everybody knew this reputation of Prince Louis, he might do something a bit comedy, so yeah.
Well, I think there's a little bit more than hidden hope. All of your eyes are special. Let's move to the next image, which is truly a photographer's eye. You took this picture some 5 years before Prince Philip, the then Duke of Edinburgh, died. Tell us a little bit about the journey of this picture, because of course it went viral in its own way.
Yeah, I mean, it took a while, but I originally took it was his last public engagement, and again, you're put into a position, and a lot of the time it's luck of the draw, with the agencies all rotate positions, and you kind of put where you're put, and on the day this picture didn't do well at all, just purely because the UK papers went with the same picture but from the front, so I was like in the back, nobody really cared about it. I liked it because it was clean, and it's often difficult to get a clean picture on these rotors because they're surrounded by people. And my only memory of this, I think it was 2017, was that a few weeks after I took it, somebody called me and wanted a copy of the picture, and they said, we're the hearing aid company that supplied his hearing aids. Yeah, so I was like, I passed them on to the right person at Reuters. I didn't just give them the picture. And then it was when he died, it became something, because I think it just told the story of a goodbye. And yeah, it did really well after he passed away.
Yeah, let's show the next photograph, which comes, or the next use of the photograph. It comes 5 years later, and it dominates the front pages of papers on both sides of the Atlantic. And it's as iconic and as silent and as clean a picture that, again, needs no words.
Yeah, I think, you see pictures of Trump and heads of states, and often you can identify them from behind or as a silhouette. And so I think this is just one of those that, like you said, there's no words for it, but you know who he is and what's going on.
And it also inspired other artists as well, if we can show the next image.
Yeah, but I reached out to him and was like, hey, I've seen your cartoon based on my photo. No reply. Yeah.
Put him in touch with the hearing aid company.
And you have a bone to pick with the royal family too, don't you?
Yeah, the royal family Instagrammed it. No tag. About 2.5 million likes. So if there is anyone from the royal family in the room, sort it out.
Get Hannah out of the pen. Lovely. And then to contrast that, to come to the close of the panel, there's a photograph here which again went around the world. And this is a photograph taken at the vigil in Clapham Common in London in 2021, following the murder of 33-year-old Sarah Everett by, of course, a serving police officer. And the image is taken at what began as a vigil and turned into a protest. Let's walk through some of this imagery, Hannah, specifically some of the technical elements, and then the backstory about how you ultimately got right in front of this image that went around the world.
It was very dark, and it was in the middle of Clapham Common with no lights, and I think it was the height of lockdown. So I think by this point, people had gone a bit crazy and needed a reason to leave the house other than just to go to Sainsbury's. And so this vigil became quite a big event. It was almost like going to the theatre. It was quite a crazy thing to be a part of. And as the evening went on and the vigil turned into a protest, the police began to arrest people, and I'd gone away from the bandstand, which is where they are now, to try and...
You were in a pen.
I was sort of, yeah, in my favourite place, in a pen. And I left to show to try and get something of the police arresting someone, just to show that side of the evening. But it was really difficult because there was no lights. And so I left the bandstand pen, and I didn't get a picture. And our time was against me because I had to get to Downing Street because they were putting out a candle on the street. So I was conscious of time.
So Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. He was going to be lighting a candle.
I was thinking, can he hold out? I need to stay. And then I went back to the bandstand because I could see there was more arrests sort of happening there. And I realised there was a ring of police officers around it. And I couldn't get back in. And I was like, I need to be the other side of these police officers. So I just said I went up to one and I was like, hey, and I was like, showed them a press card. And I was like, oh, I've dropped my lens cap in the bandstand. Can I...
So this is the first fib of truth tellers.
And he was like, okay. So he comes with me, and then we bump into a colleague, and he was like, what are you looking for? I was like, a lens cap. And he's like, oh, so there's three of us looking for this imaginary lens cap in the dark. And my colleague's making a big thing of it. He's like, you don't need it. You don't need this. And I was like, shut up, like, I do. Anyway, eventually I found the lens cap, and I was back on the bandstand, and about a minute later, this happened. So, and luckily there was a cameraman with a modelling light, or else I wouldn't have seen anything.
Yeah, because the challenge is that it is pitch black. So you have, is that a television light behind? So it's it's backlit, but you're not able to use flash in a picture like this, right? Can you explain why?
Well, police officers' high-vis jackets are a photographer's worst enemy. They just flash on silver strips. So a couple of photographers had flashes. I didn't. And this, thankfully, was lit by a cameraman. And yeah, I mean, this kind of blew up overnight, this picture. And, you know, it was a story that started as a very domestic story, and it moved into, like, you know, a global movement of women feeling, or saying that they were feeling failed by the police, and how it felt to be alone in the dark, you know, in a similar way that they thought maybe Sarah Everard had.
It's the ingenuity, I think, on display this afternoon that you hear from all three of these incredibly powerful humans who take the full opportunity to use photography for its main purpose. And it is an absolute pleasure and a privilege to say thank you to all of you this afternoon.